Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I am super excited that you are joining me for today's episode of the show. And if you listened to the podcast last week, then I announced something super exciting, and that is that I have published my first book called How to Master the Business of Yoga. And since I know some of you don't tune in for every episode every week, I wanted to share a little bit about the book. So this has been a bit of a labor of love for me. I've been working on this. Well, I started working on this like 6 years ago and then took a very serious break on it, and then more seriously started working on it about 3 years ago. And so it's taken me a long time to create, but it is a compilation of various podcast episodes that we've done over the years. And it walks you through, each chapter walks you through a different aspect of the business of yoga. So you learn from myself as well as guest experts in various different topics like teaching in yoga studios, how to run your own studio if that interests you, traveling and teaching yoga, running yoga retreats, memberships, workshops, finding your niche, marketing, branding, money, and so much more. And it really is, a compilation of practical tools and tips to help you create a thriving business. So if you would like to check out the book, if you'd like to support and purchase the book, that would be amazing. You can head on over to mbomyoga.com/book to check it out. I would be forever grateful for any support, any sharing that you do, all of that good stuff. All right. Today on the podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Ali Reina. Ali's yoga journey began in 2014 when she took a yoga class to help prepare her body physically for a half marathon, but was truly amazed how yoga provided her the mind-body-soul connection that alleviated any worries and anxieties that she brought to the mat. And a chronic health diagnosis a year later limited her physically as she was unable to exercise in the same way. And so gentle yoga classes were the only types of exercise that she was able to do. And for her, yoga became a critical part of her healing journey and lifestyle change. She was a classroom teacher for 11 years, and so Ali decided to follow a new path in teaching others about the mind-body connection yoga has to offer. She went on to receive her 200 yoga teacher training and also is certified in Yin Yoga, Chair Yoga, and Yoga Nidra. She created her business Gentle Waves Yoga in 2021 to educate others on the awareness of and experience the benefits of the gentler styles of yoga, especially for those with chronic health conditions. And so in this episode of the podcast, Ali shares about her journey with yoga and chronic illness, the benefits of the gentler styles of yoga, and why as yoga teachers we should consider offering them to our students, as well as the process of creating her business lessons she's learned, and so much more. And I feel like for me, my own personal journey with gentler styles of yoga has really evolved over the last couple of years. I think going through pregnancy and then birth, postpartum, being in this state of motherhood where things have just been crazy. My fellow mamas or parents, you know what I'm talking about. And for me, I've just been really called to the gentler styles of yoga, restorative, Yin Yoga, Yoga Nidra. I've actually been training in Yin Yoga and Yoga Nidra just at the end of this year, and it's been really beautiful to deepen these practices. So I really loved this conversation with Ali to talk about, the power of gentle yoga and how we can really support our students and their nervous systems through these practices, and why we should really consider offering these types of gentler yoga practices. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as me, and without further ado, here is Ali. Ali, welcome to the show today. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
Yeah. Can you share with listeners and myself where you're joining us from?
Sure. I'm from Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I'm doing the session in kind of my little yoga room within the house. So that's my space that I'm currently in.
Yeah, no, as listeners can't see it obviously, but I can see it, and it's a super cute little space. So definitely excited to hear more about all the goodness that happens in this little space outside of this podcast episode. But really excited to dive in with you, and I want to start with backing up a little bit and talking a little bit about your yoga story. Can you share a little bit with me about how you first got into yoga?
Definitely. So my yoga journey began back in 2014. At the time, I was training for a half marathon that I was running in. I was really active at the time, and someone had recommended yoga was really good for stretching the muscles and just to help prepare the body for the physical, endurance of a half marathon. So I went in and probably a traditional vinyasa at the studio that's my home studio where I'm currently teaching at. We could just have it as like a level 1, 2. So went in for that good, traditional vinyasa stretch. And even during the class, I couldn't believe, and I guess I wasn't aware how much my mind was moving and how hard it was to kind of be aware of the thoughts in my mind and how many things were going on the to-do list. And then that transition of the mind settling and quieting down. So while it really did help for the half marathon, it was actually more of a stress reduction and just a way to settle my mind and be aware of how fast my mind was moving at that time that drew me to yoga to begin with. And so I was practicing in that area off and on for a little bit in that same style. But then a year later, and I can talk a little bit more about it later on, but developed a chronic illness, and my body just gave out. So the exercise and the lifestyle that I had done the year before when I was first introduced to yoga, and pretty much my whole life, completely turned upside down. And so I didn't know how to exercise in the same way. My body wouldn't do what I had used to it to do. And I even tried to take that same level class. And it was such a upsetting experience because not only couldn't I do some of this stuff, but I remember specifically the instructor, at the time I was probably mid-20s, kind of even forcing me to go lower in a position. And I felt so insecure. I felt so humiliated internally because I couldn't do it. So I was forcing my body to do something and was super embarrassed and knew I couldn't practice in this level. And so I went to a step lower, which again, our studio, it's like a level 1, so more a beginner friendly, gentle vinyasa. And the teacher, who's the studio owner I work at, not only did it go at a slower pace that my body could do, but there was this demonstration of incorporating options and props and support, and I could do it. And I felt this relief. I felt this, I think I was crying at that time, because I just felt like it was something that I could do in a very individualized way and met my body where it was at. And it, wasn't something to be embarrassed about. And so from then on, that's been my practice, and my passion is the gentler styles of yoga, and just to know that there are options in a class, no matter what style, that it doesn't matter where you're coming from or what your body is doing, or on any given day, there's modifications you can do for any class really. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was just what most people think, when they're new to yoga. Oh, I want to be flexible, or I can't touch my toes, or I want to stretch for a more rigorous workout. There's so much more that encompasses the practice. So that particular class, and that's where I teach primarily in that same level, kind of opened the door in my eyes to a whole new world of yoga.
Hey, yoga teachers, we're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about Offering Tree. Now, I have a question for you. How many paid subscriptions to different platforms do you have in your business? Is it 1, 2, 5, more than that? Subscriptions can be stealthy. You sign up for free, you use the platform for a while, and then discover that you have to upgrade to a paid plan, and suddenly you find you are subscribed all over the place and the costs are ramping up. Well, with Offering Tree, you get to cancel all your subscriptions because you can pull everything all together in one place. This is one of the things that I love most about the Offering Tree platform. Your website, email marketing, on-demand library, blog, booking software, and even accepting payments happens all right there in one platform. And most importantly, with one very responsive support team. I had an issue with one of my courses the other day. I sent them a message, and within a couple hours, I had it solved. I was super impressed. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM to sign up for a no commitment free trial and get a little discount if you do decide to work with Offering Tree. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I feel like this is just such an important conversation because I feel like more and more there's like, doctors are recommending yoga to their patients, which is incredible, amazing. Like, I love that we're there. But at the same time, if you're just saying you should go to yoga and then somebody shows up at like an advanced Ashtanga class and they're dealing with, back pain or chronic illness like you were dealing with, it's like that can be more harmful than it is helpful. And I feel like there needs to be like more education on the fact that yoga there's so many different types of yoga and there's so many different ways that yoga can serve. And I think I very much like came to yoga not recognizing, I guess, like the other types of yoga outside of maybe like vinyasa, ashtanga, like the very like power yoga, hot yoga, like the movement based yogas. And then I remember the first time I did restorative, I didn't really understand like the benefits to my nervous system and stuff. So I just kind of thought like, oh, I'm like paying to lie here. And I was like, now I'm 100% down to like pay to lie around, even if I don't know the benefits. But at the time I was like, my early to mid 20s. So it's like, that wasn't the chapter of life I was in. And I just think there's so much around offering this and teaching people about it and educating people about it that's so important.
You're totally right. And it's so many things. And actually, to be honest, that's what my doctor recommended. When I went back to that level, he said, try yoga. There was a lot of different things going on with my health and I wasn't sure. And, they said yoga is a way to just relax. But that was it. So I tried a class that's all I knew with yoga. And it wasn't a fit. And that's like what you said, my passion is finding and learning what a fit is and knowing this exploration of so many other styles that, health issues or not, on any given day, you have an option to choose what's best for you. I work with, and they're great, a group of medical students, and we talk about this a lot. So it's helpful for them to get that experience of yoga for their own, stress relief. But at the same time, some of our classes is this education as you're going out into the world as doctors. Here's a lot of different styles that, depending on what your patients are experiencing, it's important for them to get that awareness. So that group is super receptive. I love them.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so excited to hear more about like all the things you do in your business too. But I want to hear a little bit about like your journey actually becoming a yoga teacher. So you had this experience of like going to yoga, enjoying yoga, getting diagnosed with chronic illness, needing to switch up what you were doing, finding something that served you. Was it at that point where you were like, hey, I want to help other people with this? Or what was that journey like to become a teacher?
Yeah, great question. So I, like I said, from about 2015, that's when I was doing more of the gentle yoga while going on my health journey. In 2019, I discovered that I had chronic Lyme disease. And my doctor had recommended you need to relax. You need to just really have a low-key lifestyle. And I discovered Yin Yoga that summer. So I was living at the beach and I did a lot of Yin that was super good for my nervous system. And it was just very reflective and helping me unpack a lot. So my journey started with actually just a Yin certification, a 30-hour Yin certification. Because I wanted to immerse a little bit more and understanding that. And I didn't feel like I could do the big commitment of a 200-hour at the studio. I grappled with it for a couple of years, and Yin was kind of that first getting your toes wet with it. But I got my certification in 2021, and it was nice because it was during the pandemic. So it was that hybrid. It was mostly online. It was going at your own pace. And it was also something that fit with where I was at with my health and personal lifestyle at the time as well. And actually started teaching at the studio when I was not even finished with my YTT. And then again, just since then, I've just been trying to delve a little bit more into some of these other styles. So I went on to get my chair yoga certification the following year. And then this past winter, I got my Yoga Nidra certification. So just trying to expand, where my interest is and dig a little deeper. It's been a wonderful journey. I recommend it to so many people who are, just kind of itching with that yoga bug. Not even necessarily if you want to teach, but just, it changes your body. It builds a new relationship with your body, yourself. And it's been a great experience. I actually was able to teach some YTTs at the studio this year. So it was really exciting too.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like yoga teacher training is like one of the best forms of personal development you can do. Like, even if you just want to deepen your practice and learn more about yoga, I feel like it's a beautiful journey to go on. And also, I've gotten kind of into Yoga Nidra this year just because I've done it on and off over the years, but I think I'm just particularly in a chapter of life where I was telling you before we hit record just about my busy, busy motherhood life with a toddler. I just feel like, 15 minutes to like fully rejuvenate my body or 20 minutes to do that is so beautiful. And I feel like it's just serving me in like a way that sometimes meditation just like isn't, I guess, right now in this chapter. And so, yeah, it's really cool to hear that you did your training in that. I've been contemplating it.
The training is interesting because it breaks down kind of all the dynamics of it. And I never knew, like you said, 15 minutes, that's all it is. Well, why do I feel so good? Why is it the equivalent of an hour of sleep? And it's because your brain which I learned at the training, your brain goes into the delta brain waves sooner, and you're in that dreamless state. And so that's why you're in such a, the senses are disengaged. You're in this state where it's a lot of repair and restoration for the brain and the whole body. And then your overall quality of sleep gets better too. And the heart of it is the body scan, and a really, in-depth body scan. So that is the heart and soul of the Yoga Nidra, which doesn't have to be 15 minutes. It could be like I start and end all my classes with a brief body scan, just because it feels good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love doing body scans too, as like ways to bring people into awareness. Like, even when I teach the business of yoga, I teach for a teacher training program based out of Vancouver. I teach remotely since I'm down in Mexico, but I love to start like ground us all together in the Zoom room with a body scan. Nothing better than kicking off learning about marketing with a body scan.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah.
One thing I was curious about, Ali, you mentioned that your health journey kind of started in 2015, but then you didn't get diagnosed with chronic Lyme until 2019. It took 4 years to get that like official diagnosis.
It did. So while I was training for the marathon, there were some symptoms. What I've learned, the biggest lesson in yoga is how much the body communicates with us and is talking. And my body was talking to me and giving me signals for probably a few years. I lived a really type A personality, go, 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 perfectionist. And I was a reading specialist with a pretty high intensity job. And so even with yoga, I'd leave before Shavasana because I was like, I don't have time for this. I got more things to do.
Yeah. It's like, I don't have time to take a nap at like 12:50. I got to get back to the office.
Exactly. Why is everyone lying here? I would just step over people during Shavasana and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. It's the best part. And so important. And so, I would have these moments throughout the day where I'd feel that fatigue or brain fog, this crash in the afternoon, and I didn't quite know what was going on. And so a year later, when my body gave out, I woke up one day and I had pain all over. So I went through a lot of different testing. And with any type of autoimmune, invisible illness, chronic conditions, there's a lot of overlapping symptoms. So I was tested with a lot of different things. And it came up as fibromyalgia. And I do have fibromyalgia. It's kind of, if you don't qualify for something else like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, I didn't have any of those factors. It was that. So, and there was a lot of different symptoms in addition to the fatigue and brain fog. It was a lot of sensory overload, sensitivity to noises and lights. My cortisol for all these years was really high. That's, the stress hormone. I was in that fight or flight state. And I just wasn't sold. I'm like, there's something more. I was having stomach issues. So I changed my lifestyle. I eliminated gluten. I slowed things down. I did more gentle yoga, and it was really hard. And so a few years later, I just kind of kept like listening to, there's something more. And I remembered my first year of teaching, a bite that I had on my chin. And this was almost 10 years now. So I started teaching in 2010 and had the bite then, and we're going into 2019. And from doing a lot of research on my own and advocating, I was like, this is it. I have Lyme disease. And they had tested me. And it came up negative. It's a really tough gray, sometimes complex and often misunderstood area. But when it's in your body and it's not caught, it becomes chronic. So I even went through different doctors and found a holistic doctor who did a ton of additional tests, which kind of also made sense with some food sensitivities, or I had really low serotonin. And not only did I have chronic Lyme, but I had two co-infections, which that's another part that can be very complex with Lyme is there's often these co-infections that it could have been the spider bite that I had. We have no idea. It could have been, we get bit by bugs all the time, mosquitoes, and they carry other things besides Lyme, but there's not traditional testing. So I have Bartonella and Ehrlichia. And Bartonella is more neurological. So, these co-infections target different areas in the body. And that's why it is so complex to kind of put the whole puzzle piece together. So it took that long. And sadly, that's a lot of people's story. They go through a lot of doctors and misdiagnosis or because of the overlapping symptoms. But yoga has, again, especially when I was going through the yoga teacher training, that consistent practice of really connecting and listening to my body, increasing my body awareness and my relationship. Now I can kind of tell what symptoms are what, or what's going to flare me up, what foods is going to exacerbate me, what time of year, allergy wise, things like that. So it's been life changing. And to be honest, I made a huge life decision. I walked away from my full-time job 2 years ago. And put my health first. And that's been a transition, but that's just something that, I can't wake up early in the morning. I need to take breaks. Cognitively, I need to, have that time to process. And it was just what was best for me.
Ready to supercharge your career and business success? Coach Pals is the ultimate networking platform tailored exclusively for wellness professionals like yourself. Coach Pals focuses on empowering connections that truly transform your path. Whether you're a dedicated yoga teacher or an ambitious yoga business owner, they've got you covered with innovative features designed just for you. Let's talk about Coach Pal's professional profiles. They're not your typical resumes. They're dynamic showcases of your expertise, experience, and skills, enriched with your wellness passion, journey, and community impact. With testimonials and skill endorsements, your profile becomes a magnetic hub for partners and clients. Imagine having a central space that unites your professional identity, opening doors to limitless opportunities thanks to the power of effective networking. From dream job openings to fruitful partnerships and supportive communities, Coach Pals truly has it all. Use code MBOM, that's MBOM, to enjoy your first month free when subscribing to a professional monthly plan. Learn more about Coach Pals Pro membership benefits at coachpals.com/memberships. Once again, use code MBOM when you're signing up to get your first month free. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, and what a blessing to be able to do that, right? And take care of ourselves. I think that if we have the opportunity, it's like, why would we not take advantage of that, right? Like we only get one body.
We do. And honestly, and I've heard this a lot. I don't know. I'm sure you've had guests say it too. COVID opened the door for that opportunity. COVID, a lot of people pivoted from their career, from life decisions. And when we went remote with school, I was able to have that part-time kind of job and that flexibility, and I got better. And so when I went back in the fall and had that taste of I can actually get better and have a life that I want to live, that's when I was like, I can't do this. So I know a lot of people probably were similar, where they just made a big life decision as a result of COVID. So there were a lot of good things and blessings to come out of at that time, a lot of introspection and opportunities that we may not have gotten other times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, COVID, the pandemic is I think a horrible blip in time for many of us. And I think there's a lot of trauma that's happened for many people, physically, emotionally, mentally, for many different reasons, which we don't need to get into. But I think that now that we're kind of on the other side of it, it's really interesting to look at the silver linings, or how we can make lemonade of lemons per se. And I think that there's some really beautiful shifts that have happened in general, but also specifically within the yoga industry. Teaching yoga online, pre-2020 was kind of weird, pretty foreign. A lot of people weren't doing it. Studios certainly weren't doing it. most teachers were not familiar with like the equipment for it or Zoom or, how to create their business. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that have come out of this shift that we've seen. And I think it's really cool to be able to like work from home, and not just for somebody like yourself that wants to focus on their health, but for people like myself as well. And I mean, I was working online way, way, way pre-pandemic, but like having the opportunity to live in another country, to be mostly a full-time mother while working part-time is like something that I think, 10 years ago was like really foreign, unachievable. It'd be like, I'd have to be leaving the house to like go and do those things, same with you. And so I feel like there are lots of good things that have come out of it in terms of building our own business and working online.
It is attainable. I think that's what, things that maybe we wouldn't have thought 10 years ago, like I could never leave my job or I can never live remotely. You can. There's a lot of creativity. And in the yoga world, a lot of people are coming to the studio. A lot of people are finding yoga, but in a gentler way, or they're curious of wanting to do something for their mental health to be a stress reduction. And so COVID brought that to the surface. But really, it's been something where we've just been living it. It's more glorified to live a high paced, always just going attitude and lifestyle. And really it's not sustainable. And so it's having these real discussions now about burnout or setting boundaries or what can I do to like take those pauses. They're finding yoga, they're wanting to know more about it. And that's so important, and COVID helped to kind of bring that to the forefront that people, me included, especially did neglect that. And my thing is take advantage of it before, your body lets you know that you can't. I learned the hard way and I wish I listened to it more.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you bring up so many good points there. And I think it's like, our body does talk to us. It gives us these little signs and signals and emotions. And I know I've had, my own journey in a different way with that in terms of like, okay, I really need to listen to this. And I feel like going through this period where we had so much like collective stress happen and so much like collective kind of like mental health stuff sort of flare up in this way that it certainly existed before, but I feel like maybe we weren't seeing it as much, especially like as a collective. I think brought this opportunity of like people slowing down, seeking out like gentler forms of taking care of their bodies, starting to tune in a little bit more. So yeah, I feel like another kind of like silver lining of it. I feel weird saying that because obviously like mental health stuff coming to the forefront is not a great thing, but it's like it was there before. It's just like, were we dealing with it? And I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh no, I'm fine. My mental health is okay. And then people go through a big trauma like the pandemic and they're like, I'm actually not okay. I need to rest. I need to listen to my body. I need to slow down. And I think that doing that it's better to do it now than to do it in like 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And with that being said too, it also opens this collective, I love that collective community of there's compassion, there's understanding, there's empathy where, it's not just one person who's like, oh, I need to set boundaries. And everyone's like, why are you saying, what's going on? What does that mean? And now there's this understanding when someone says, I need to take time for myself or pause. And it's this acceptance a little bit more. It's a little bit softer because of that, and I think that that's so important. That's something that I, again, struggled with, especially when things with any type of mental health or invisible illness, people can't see it. So we kind of hide behind this mask. And now we're just able to let those masks down a little bit, let our guard down and be vulnerable with one another. And that is healing too, with what's been going on.
Yeah, 100%. And so I would love to dive into a little bit more of like the gentler forms of yoga and even some other like, self-care practices that maybe you do. Because I don't think we necessarily have to have chronic illness to be doing this stuff at all. Like, I think, if you're a tired mom like me, or you're somebody who's like building a business, which, you and I are both doing on top of the other stuff we have going on, or you're somebody who's like, maybe you're the breadwinner for your family and you're like hustling to make it work, how can we take care of ourselves? So I'd love to dive into like, the gentler forms of yoga, what those look like, and then any other self-care practices.
Great. Yeah. So within the umbrella of the gentler forms, you mentioned vinyasa, that's kind of that traditional term for just really any type of flow or movement that you're syncing breath with movement with. It's a little bit more heated. The gentler form of vinyasa could just be called like gentle flow or gentle mat movement. And it's still heated, but it's not as intensive. There's a lot more guidance from the instructor, a lot more of that breath work, because it is hard to slow the mind down. It is hard to kind of know what does my breath look like? How do I slow it down? And so taking a class like that with someone who is there to help guide you and kind of, model how that looks and how that feels and how we make that transition. It's that mindfulness factor, to really slow it down and then notice where we're holding. We had mentioned the body scan, that stress and tension in our body, and just to let that go and release it. So within the gentle flow, there's a little bit more purposeful mindfulness, a little bit more breath work. Poses go at a little bit slower pace, but it's still some fluid movement. I had mentioned Yin Yoga, which is the opposite. So Yin Yoga, think of the yin yang. I always will tell people that Yang's more of the movement, and the Yin is the passive and the cooling. So you're holding poses, but nothing intense for the most part, anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. But you're using props, and support, so blocks, pillows, bolsters, anything to just feel really supportive and good. And it's a way to just let go of places where we have stuck emotional and energetic stuff. So whether that's trauma, whether that's stress, yin sometimes in the beginning can be really tough because it's quiet. There's not as much guidance from the teacher. But once you hit that little point of like 1.5 minutes, it's this release of the nervous system. I know for me, I still Yin is really involved in my own personal practice. I can feel my whole nervous system like that settling down, that tingling feeling. And it's just, it doesn't have to be super long. It could just be even taking one pose at night, any of these things. And I've mentioned it to anyone I talk to. Yoga doesn't have to be an hour class. It can be, and that's wonderful, but it could be a 5-minute body scan. It could be taking 3 minutes to hold a yin pose, at the evening before you go to bed. Another style I like is chair yoga. And to be honest, that's probably where my body was at back in 2015 that I should have started. But I had the misconception it's just for old people. And I feel terrible saying that. But once I got my certification,
a common misconception.
Yeah. And
I bet you there's teachers listening to you who are like thinking maybe that as well.
It's amazing. It opened my eyes because it could be someone, let's say they have knee surgery or an ACL surgery too. That's the perfect place to continue your yoga practice. And, even sitting at a desk for business or teachers or any worker, you can take 5 minutes, or even I would tell teachers I work with in between the classes when kids are like leaving from one classroom to another, any type of movement with the twist or a neck or hands, and just getting, the stuck tightness and stress out of your joints and different body parts. That's yoga. It doesn't have to be an hour-long chair. And it's the chair yoga. You're doing the same exact poses. It's just transferred onto the chair and modified in that way. And that is really cool. So it isn't, there's again, many options depending on, it can be for people who are wheelchair bound or who need to be seated, but at the same time, you can still be getting a lot of strengthening and stretching on the chair. It's really, really cool. And again, often misunderstood, by a lot of people. And then again, the last one is the Yoga Nidra, which is that no movement yoga. So it is something that, counts as a style and in that umbrella of yoga, but there's no movement. It translates to sleep yoga. So that's where a lot of my passion has been. In fact, I will offer it just either as a class. I'll try to combine it with movement and then Yoga Nidra at the end. People love it. And it's amazing because, most people do tend to fall in and out of sleep with Yoga Nidra, and it's hard to get people to come out even just 15 minutes. And that's what their body needs. And it's really funny. I did it once with a group of former teachers. Interestingly, the guys are the ones that don't come out of it right away, and it's, I think because there is this, they carry a lot of stress and,
I mean, they carry a lot in general. And I feel like there's not the softness.
and they're not as open to something like this. So when they allow themselves that time to just let go and release, they really need it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing those. And I'm curious, I kind of want to dive into like both why teachers should consider offering this and then also like how we kind of sell our students on these practices. Like if you have students like you and I kind of like in the past before we recognize how good this was for us, or maybe our body started yelling at us like, hey, slow down, how do we convince our students to do that? But maybe let's start with like why teachers should consider this as their offerings, like why gentle yoga can be a really great part of your business or maybe even your business.
I think even if they have the awareness of these different styles, to make it makes it more real in class. So rather than just like pushing through and teaching like an hour vinyasa, if the teacher is able to maybe share a little bit about, oh, this is something for chair yoga, or hey, I'm struggling with stress. Even if they're working at a studio or they know something and they're like, there's an upcoming Yoga Nidra, and explaining to the students what it is and being able to say, this has helped me. Like you said, I love Yoga Nidra right now. It kind of takes that, how do I want to say it? Like we put them on a pedestal. I think, our yoga teacher, once you can remove that and it's this community and we're all in this together by sharing and being a little bit more open, you have no idea who's going to pick up on that and really need to hear that and try to experience it. So one of the things with when I teach, especially having that being part of the invisible illness community, is I don't know how you are, but a lot of my students will come up and say, oh, I have, a bad knee. I had a knee replacement. I had a hip replacement. I had shoulder surgery. No one comes up and says, hey, I have lupus. Hey, I have Lyme disease, because it is something that is, we're in this group, the Spoonies, of kind of don't want to be misunderstood. It's invisible. You can't see it. So by modeling a couple modifications in a class and just say, and it could be in a level 1 too, here's how you do half moon with blocks. That could be so powerful for someone in that room who isn't able to come up and tell the instructor, this is what I have going on, but they're embarrassed to maybe ask after class. But if the instructor can kind of show that as well and demonstrate, then that can make such a difference and give hope to people who are struggling in any type of way, and make it more accessible for them, because that is the worst feeling, to go to a yoga class because a doctor recommended it or because you think it's going to help and it's not a fit, and you leave and you feel disheartened and embarrassed. Our job as yoga instructors is to provide healing and relief. And even if it's one time, just mentioning a type of modification or a breath work or advice, they might take that and be able to implement that in their day-to-day lives. And that's really why we're here.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I like to think about like, in like all levels vinyasa, how I'm like sprinkling other little bits of yoga, because I'm kind of like, all levels vinyasa is not where it's at, my friends. Like all the other goodness is where it's really at least for me. That's been my journey. And that's where I started, right? And I think other teachers giving me little sprinkles of philosophy and breath work and whatnot is really great. And I kind of like to think about, hey, you came to this class, you want to work hard. Sure, we can work hard, but we're also going to do some stuff that like down regulates your nervous system, because I think everyone needs that. Like truly, I feel like I can't think of like a single person that I know personally who doesn't need nervous system regulation. Like even if they don't have chronic illness, right? It's like there's chronic stress, there's chronic fatigue, there's like overwhelm that's happening. And I feel like so many people are experiencing those things. And while maybe it's not like under the umbrella of invisible illness, I feel like it's kind of under this umbrella of like you're experiencing something that's kind of so normalized that it's almost like, hey, we don't do anything about this because it's just how we live. It's how we live in 2023. We live with fatigue and stress and overwhelm. And it's like, we don't need to live like that. There's things we can do to kind of help with these things.
And I think I am surprised too. a lot of students don't know some of these other styles. So we kind of go in. I've assumed, when I've talked about, or I'll maybe mention, hey, we have a new class, a Yin Yoga, and people say, well, what's Yin Yoga? If they come every week to my class, it surprises me that they actually don't know what it is because they're regular yogis. So I think, for anyone listening who's a teacher, taking that time to sprinkle in some education about that, with just what is Yin Yoga? Here's a class. If you're feeling overwhelmed with work and you just can't sleep at night, try this. Because the truth is, our yogis don't know. They're not really aware of all of that, and that might be really important for them to try a different style. Especially ones that come every week. They develop a trust with you, and maybe will be more open to, hey, I can't sleep at night. My mind's racing. I'm going to try a Yoga Nidra for 15 minutes because maybe it'll help me. And just kind of going in with not assuming just because they come to a yoga class, they are aware of all the different styles available to them.
Yes. Yes. I think this is so important. And this kind of goes into where I wanted to take this next in terms of like, how do we like educate our students? And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, and I'd love to dive in a little bit more, but I love the piece of like, if students are coming to your classes regularly, like it's not only sprinkling in the breath work or sprinkling in a long shavasana with maybe a body scan or whatever it is, maybe a longer hold in a pose. I feel like it's educating them on like why you're doing it, because that kind of teaches them like the power of what they're doing. Because I think sometimes we do things and we're like, oh, that like felt really good, but I don't really understand like the science of why it felt good, or like, did I just really need 10 minutes in shavasana today because I'm tired because, whatever, I didn't sleep well last night. So I'm curious, as teachers, if we're going to be teaching these like gentler styles of yoga, like how do we, I feel like the words that are coming to mind for me is like, how do we sell our students on it? But I think it's more like, how do we educate our students on the benefits of this?
I think that's where, it's not necessarily just the cues. Yes, you have to make sure that there's still the safety and the modifications and the options of traditional cueing, but the benefits to infuse that in. So maybe go back to your yoga teacher trainer manual and look at some of the benefits, like twists. So for example, a lot of times when I'm doing different twists, yes, it's good for digestion. Yes, it's helping our digestive organs, but that's because 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut, and that's our feel-good hormone. So maybe incorporating some other additional research of why does yoga feel so good for the nervous system? And if it's not in your yoga teacher manual, maybe look it up a little, or just, when you're planning your classes, something that's relevant of stress release, stress reduction within the poses. So they're not just like, oh, that feels good. Even like I said to you earlier, for years I've done Yoga Nidra. I never knew until I had the research this year, your brain goes into delta brainwaves. I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, and then there's a little bit of buy-in and validity that you're like, that makes sense. I'm not getting that restoration. So I think finding some of, that research going in. I mean, it might take a little bit more work, but as a former educator, that's how we teach. We kind of go on our own and look things up and, dig a little bit deeper to kind of sprinkle that in, not just saying, hey, we have a Yoga Nidra class on a Thursday, but what is it about that class? Who would benefit from it? Why would it be so good? And providing that information to students a little bit more purposeful and intentional.
Yeah, I love that. I think also too, when you were talking about the chair yoga, like I think there are, like we were saying, a lot of people who think like chair yoga, for example, is only for people who maybe aren't able-bodied or maybe, have had knee surgery. And I think chair yoga is like a beautiful practice for somebody who works all day at a desk. You have 5 minutes. Of course, you should get up, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs, maybe do a couple forward folds and some lunges. Like that's great. But I think also just taking a minute to like stretch your fingers and like roll your wrists and do some work with your neck and maybe do a couple twists. I know that was something when I was super pregnant. I was huge. My daughter was really big when she was born, but I was huge. And so I was really uncomfortable, but I was working full time, sitting all day. And I was also like, just not comfortable, like walking, moving. I was just uncomfortable. So like for me, any type of movement was key. And so I started doing like little mini yoga breaks with like in my chair. Cause it was like, I just need to get the blood flowing in some way and moving my body. Like, was I capable of doing an hour yoga class? Sure, a modified, slower one, but to just do like 5 minutes here and there was like felt so good for my body.
And I was just gonna ask, did that make a difference? Like, did you notice a difference with that? Just feeling good?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think one thing, and I know this experience just from like working in general at a desk. Like it's like, you get huddled over and you're typing on your keyboard and your neck's all scrunched up, and maybe you're working on something that you're just like so super focused on, and all of a sudden you come up for a breath of fresh air and you go to stand up and you're like, you feel like you've been sitting for 12 hours. It's like getting up after a long flight or something like that. But I feel like when I was pregnant, I just felt like that sitting like an hour and a half is just like, I would be like that classic pregnant woman with like her big belly and her hand on her back waddling around. And so for me to do a bit of movement every couple of minutes, just, I don't know, helped my body feel a lot better.
And like you said, those are the reasons why it paused the body. It just kind of got that fluidity of everything going, and then it clears your mind too. And all it takes is a few minutes. You know, of any style of work, whether you're pregnant, whether I would honestly, when I was a teacher, I would lock my door. If I had a prep period, I would turn off the lights. And that's what I would do too, just for a few minutes, and maybe do that like 3 times a day at different points. And just think all those little moments add up to something bigger. Because I know from experience, maybe you start out your morning and you're like, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go to a yoga class, and you sign up, and then the day happens and you have no idea what's going to happen in a day. That by 4 o'clock, it's like, never mind, there's no way I can go to an hour class. There's no way I can go to the gym, and cancel a class, or you decide not to go. But if you set a timer and do something for 2 to 3 minutes 4 times a day, like that's almost a half hour of movement. That's 15 minutes of movement, and that's still getting in, and it's accessible. That's, what I want to hopefully convey to people, that it is possible. It doesn't have to be a huge goal of an hour. That is hard. Maybe you can work your way up to that. But if there are different pauses and moments throughout a day to just pause, have that time for yourself to do whatever you need, breath work, chair movement, a body scan. I do a body scan when I'm sitting at a red light or stuck in traffic, because how much are we gripping our wheel and tightening our jaw? And then it's like, okay, I'm not,
Or
just
like
because
grabbing our phone, right? And then like getting distracted from the act of driving.
it's like just doing that at a red light. It's 30 seconds, and it's purposeful. But the more we practice these little manageable moments, then they add up to habits, and then it becomes something that we look forward to because it makes us feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious, before we kind of get into your business and the business things, all the business things, do you have any other self-care practices that really help you, like particularly with chronic illness, but just that you find in general great for like mental health, stress?
My personal practice is some of the things we've mentioned before. I have more or less have created like a toolbox, a toolkit, because on some days, some of my practices don't work. And then I have found myself kind of panicking a little when my body scan doesn't work and it doesn't make me feel good. So then sometimes I'll reach in and grab something different. So for me, movement helps. So if it's like a walk or, my own little practice, but sometimes it doesn't. So when it doesn't help, a body scan, sometimes it's even just laying on my belly and not doing anything and just being in crocodile, which is, a yoga move. It's a yoga pose, but it is very grounding because I feel better and can feel my breath when my belly is connecting to the ground. Especially if it's like panicky and it's up in my shoulders, there's a lot of anxiety with some of my conditions. So being able to feel nice and low to the ground, the cooling sensation, and I can feel that diaphragmatic belly breath for a few minutes, that helps a lot. Epsom salt baths help me at the end of a day. And it's something where it's also good for the nervous system. You're getting that magnesium. A lot of my self-care I follow a pretty strict diet. I have to, I've learned what causes inflammation for me. So I, try to follow something that it's very hard and disciplined. But be aware of the food that you're putting in your body, because sometimes food can, like, I had no idea that gluten was causing some of my pain and some of my brain fog until I eliminated it. So sometimes it could be as simple as just take notice of how you feel after you eat certain foods, what times a day, what food fills you up and makes you feel good. And just, maybe journal a little bit about that, and just take notice. And it might require a little bit of elimination, but for a couple weeks, and reintroduce it and see how you feel. I'll notice if I'm drinking more coffee, which I currently am now. I'm in more of a heightened cortisol state. So it's that awareness too. But self-care can be anything in that toolbox of, think of it like Maslow's hierarchy, your foundational needs: food, safety, rootedness, groundedness, security. So that breath work, movement, food, nourishment, whatever's going to ground you, getting a lot of sleep. And if I can't sleep and having that routine, I'll put in a Yoga Nidra. That's part of my self-care. That's the equivalent of my afternoon nap that I try to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's amazing to hear that you've got like a toolbox full of stuff. So if it's like, okay, this isn't working or serving me right now, I've got like other tools in my toolbox to help. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And it's taken years. It is not something that you just automatically go. It's so much of trial and error, and having, resources. We are so fortunate to have apps like the Calm app, or I listen to a lot of podcasts because my mind races in the morning. So a podcast will help me listen and bring me back in. So try them. A lot of them are for free for like 30 days or something. And that way you can kind of see what works best for you and then create a toolkit. So my toolkit's probably been going on for about 7 years, and it's always changing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, very much the same way. I feel like I go through phases. Like I said, I'm really into Yoga Nidra right now. And I've known about Yoga Nidra since I did teacher training in like 2015, but it's like just come and gone, right? And it's okay to have that when it comes to your practices, your yoga, your self-care. It's like sometimes we're in phases of this is really serving me, and then it's not serving you anymore, and you find something new that's serving you. And I think that that's beautiful.
It is. And it's hard sometimes to just say, like, there was a time last year where I finally got my practice to a place in my body that felt good. Like, it took me a really long time to do a down dog with my body. So I was practicing harder. And then I got COVID last year, and I just couldn't, my body needed a lot of time to get better. And it was discouraging a little, but it's like, I could do yin yoga now, or I could do a little bit gentler, slower to build my body up, or maybe just do something different that I like to do. So have fun too. Find something that brings you joy and happiness and that you enjoy to do, because your self-care should be something that is not something on the to-do list that's pressure. It should just be something that makes you feel good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is also making me think that, like, as teachers, if we're offering this, I think reminding our students that, like, there's no shame in slowing down. Like, I think one thing that's kind of hard for a lot of people, and especially if you kind of maybe have that more type A, maybe that like pitta, that fiery personality, is like you want to do the classes where you're like standing on your head or practicing handstands or doing arm balances. And sometimes there's just chapters in life where like that doesn't serve us. And sometimes what we can do that's best for us is breathing, breath work, or yoga nidra, or sitting in a chair and moving that way. And I think that as teachers, if we're going to offer this, I think it's really our responsibility to hold space and remind people that, like, this work is beneficial, this work is beautiful. And, sometimes this is just what we need. I think my story and my journey is so different from yours, so I don't want to like compare them, but I feel like one thing I relate to, especially going through like pregnancy and postpartum, is like there's just things that my body hasn't been able to do in the last 2 years, and that's okay, right? But there's a part of my like ego that's like, oh, I see people doing all the things I could do before I got pregnant, before I had a baby, that type of stuff, where it's like, oh, I kind of want to do that again. But I'm like, you know what? It's not the chapter of life I'm in right now. Like, maybe we'll be back in that chapter at some point, but it's not right now.
And I love that you say that, and I think there's so much to share that with our students. As a teacher, when I was, with my kids in my classroom, I think when you could be real and authentic with them and be saying that, then they see you as a real person. It is hard. It is hard to accept the season of life we're in. It's hard. We still have egos as yoga teachers. I think sometimes they think, oh, they're peaceful and they could do all this stuff. And it's a practice for a reason. It takes work, and we're just like them. We're human, and we want to compare, and we want to be able to maybe be at a different place that our bodies want to go somewhere else, and letting them know that, and just saying, I've struggled with this. This is where I'm at. It just breaks those barriers down and makes us more authentic. And again, we're human, and we're all part of this experience of adjusting and going with, whatever wave of life we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Well, I want to talk about your business. Can you share a little bit with myself and listeners, what you do, what you offer, what you've been creating over these last couple of years?
Sure. So, I have kind of two different gigs going on. So I'm currently very fortunate to be the studio manager at the studio at my hometown in Allentown that I've practiced at. That's where I got my YTT. I teach my level 1 classes, a lot of workshops, and learned the business side of things, which has opened so many doors, that I created my own business a couple years ago. And didn't really quite know the direction I wanted to take it. But because of the gentler styles that I really am passionate about the education of these styles, to bring to people in a very personalized and accessible way. That's kind of the mission of Gentle Waves Yoga, is the name of my business. So, a lot of what I do is working with either individual people, one-on-one in privates. I love collaborating. So I work with a lot of groups. I've worked with businesses where we've done chair yoga, a combination of chair yoga and Yoga Nidra. I've worked with teachers, student athletes, medical students. Just, I love the collaboration of reaching out and educating people. So, I'm open to where the business is going, but my heart is really just twofold, is to provide that opportunity and education of these styles to people, but also with anyone who's dealing with stress, not just like you said, the chronic illness, anyone who is dealing with just day-to-day stress in life. And, if some of those people are chronic, so those with chronic conditions, wonderful. I've presented to different support groups, the lupus support group, the Lyme support group, as a way to know that this is these styles of yoga and some of these smaller pieces that we've talked about, so far with the breath work and these pauses throughout the day, are ways to provide healing and relief, and just to bring you back to a feeling of peace, even if it's just for a moment. So that's really where my heart and soul is in, my personal business.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that you're doing this. I feel like the world just needs more of this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
feel like
relatively
I'm not
new.
anti like the Ashtanga power yogas of the world. So just don't want anyone to think that. But I think just where I am right now, and where I just feel like the world is, like where we are as a collective kind of post pandemic, I just feel like what we need more of is this.
Yes, I appreciate that. I hope. And it's new. It's a relatively new, adventure for me. I created it, and then I put it on pause because I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So I've been more active with it since about January, and am excited and open to see who I work with, where it can go, and how many of the collective, it can just benefit from it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm curious, Ali, if you can share with me some of the biggest business lessons you've learned so far in your business.
That's a great question, Amanda. I think it's like with anything, it's the business ebbs and flows. My husband and I have our own business as well. And so I've learned from the studio manager, that within a year, there are highs and lows and different seasons. And sometimes it's super popular and profitable, and other times it's quiet and slow, and that's okay. So, for lack of a better analogy, from Gentle Waves, life ebbs and flows. And so the business ebbs and flows. And it's okay to take pauses and it's okay to reflect and just see what the next move is going to be. So sometimes in those moments where it's low and there's not a whole lot of activity, that could be a time for reflection and creativity and introspection to see what the next venture is going to be. And then the second thing that I've learned is to collaborate and to really, there are so many people who have so much to offer with gifts and talents, and it's okay to bring them on board. You don't need to do it all on your own. There are some limitations I have, with my health, with processing and cognitively when it comes to the computer. I'm just not that great at it. And I have my cousin helping me with a lot of the virtual assistant work and social media, and I could never do that. And I'm so grateful and, open to have someone just be a part of that teamwork. That's something that I do miss as a teacher. I loved the collaboration. I loved working, with a group. And as a business owner, you still can have that. And that's been, really interesting to experience.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Those are beautiful. I'm a big fan of collaboration over competition. I feel like I say this a lot on the podcast, so maybe you've heard it in the episodes you've listened to, but I just feel like it's like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of scarcity mindset and a lot of people are kind of like, oh, there's only one job, so I need to kind of like fight this yoga teacher for it. And I'm like, we just don't need to be like that. I don't think. It's just very un-yogic to me. And I just think there's space truly for all of us.
It's so true. It's so not yoga like. And it's interesting because even with the collaboration, sometimes what I've learned too is everything is a learning experience, even if it doesn't work out, how you envision or long term, and it's helping you to become the next phase. Everything is so purposeful and intentional, and you never know what's around the corner. But if something is only, maybe that one client who was your first one and you connected so well, and then they were only there for a couple months and you're like, well, why didn't they call? What's going on? It's okay to let it go. And they were there and they helped you, and just to be open to doors that are open and when windows need to be closed, and just to go with the flow within that too. And it is hard though with the ego.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's a lot of our work, I think, as humans. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for everything you've shared today, Ali. This has just been a really wonderful conversation, and I'm just really grateful for the work that you're putting out into the world. And hopefully this has encouraged some other yoga teachers to perhaps consider offering these gentler styles of yoga for their students, or maybe even in their personal practices, because I feel like yoga teachers get stressed too, right? Like we've got our own stuff we're dealing with also. I'm curious, can you share where people can go to find you if they want to learn more about you, maybe work with you, all that good stuff?
Sure. And thanks again, Amanda. I love this conversation. I love talking with someone that, understands and has that same passion and awareness of that. So it's been such a pleasure. You can find me on my website. It's gentlewavesyoga.com, and Instagram, Gentle Waves Yoga. So, there's offerings right now that are either individualized personal options or community calm, which is more for group offerings. Right now, this, we're trying to kind of put more information and education out there about the different styles and how they can work, and maybe customize an offering for either an individual or a group setting.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure there's links for all of that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Amanda.
All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the podcast with Ali Reina. Make sure you go check her out at Gentle Waves Yoga. Give her some love. A big thank you to the sponsors for this episode, Offering Tree and Coach Pals. Make sure you guys go check them out, see how they can support you in your yoga business. And a big thank you if you decide to check out or purchase my book. Once again, it's mbomyoga.com/book to check that out. And I'm just grateful for all of your support with the book, the podcast, and everything that I'm doing. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Okay, bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.